The 5 moments that make avoidants regret losing the super empath. There's a moment, maybe it's late at night, maybe after a glass of wine, maybe during a scroll through old photos, when it hits them, the avoidant, the one who pulled away, built the walls, dodged the intimacy, and suddenly they feel it, that regret. Because you weren't just anyone, you were the super empath. You didn't just feel, you understood, you didn't chase. You held space. You didn't beg. You believed in them even when they didn't believe in themselves. And that's why they remember you. Not because you were loud, but because your silence after they lost you said everything. Let me walk you through the 5 moments that haunt the avoidants when losing you becomes their biggest regret. At first, when the super empath pulls back, the avoidant feels relief. The space feels like freedom, like a pressure valve has been released. For someone used to retreating the moment emotional intensity builds, the quiet feels comfortable. At least initially, they think, finally, some distance. But over time, that silence becomes noticeable in a different way. Something is missing: the good morning texts, the thoughtful check-ins, the steady emotional presence that always made them feel grounded, even if they didn't acknowledge it at the time. They realize they haven't just lost a voice, they've lost an energy, a warmth that filled the empty spaces of their life. The empath used to initiate. They asked how the avoidant was feeling, they listened deeply, and they made emotional room for things that were never said aloud. The avoidant got used to that emotional labor being done for them. They didn't have to reach out, because the empath always did. They didn't have to name their feelings, because the empath always sensed them. It created an illusion that connection could exist without effort on their part. But when the empath stops reaching out, the avoidant is forced to face something they've been avoiding all along: the weight of their own detachment. The absence starts to sting, not because the empath is gone, but because now they must confront the reality they were being held together emotionally by someone they took for granted. The silence isn't passive anymore. It's a statement. It's not that the empath is portraying games or to provoke a reaction. It's that they've finally chosen themselves. They've stopped giving energy to someone who refused to meet them halfway. This moment creeps in slowly. It doesn't come with fireworks or confrontation. It comes with a quiet discomfort, the kind that grows louder every day. The avoidant checks their phone and notices it's been days, weeks. They remember moments when the empath would have said something, reached out, soothed them without being asked. Now it's just stillness. And in that stillness, the avoidant hears everything they ignored when the empath was still trying. The love that was expressed without demands. The loyalty that came without conditions. The care that was steady, patient, unwavering. And now it's just not there. That's the moment regret begins to bloom. Not because the empath left in anger, but because they left in peace. And there is nothing more unsettling to someone who fears intimacy than realizing they lost someone who only ever wanted to love them deeply and consistently. There's a shift that happens after the super empath walks away, one that the avoidant doesn't see coming. It's not loud. It doesn't come with declarations or pleas for closure. It unfolds quietly, gradually, as the empath begins to heal in their own way. At first, the avoidant assumes the empath is still hurting, stuck in the aftermath, perhaps waiting or hoping for a return. But as time passes, a different picture begins to emerge. The empath is not stuck. They're evolving. They're smiling more. They're engaging with the world. Their energy is different. Lighter, freer. And it's not an act, it's real healing. This is when the avoidant starts to feel the first twinges of confusion. Because in their mind, the empath was always the emotionally invested one, the person who felt too much, the one they could step away from without lasting consequences. They never expected the empath to move on so gracefully, to rebuild themselves stronger than before. The avoidant scrolls through social media or hears from a mutual friend. Suddenly they're confronted with undeniable evidence the person they left behind is not only okay, they're thriving. And it stings. They see it in the way the empath now carries themselves, in the peace that radiates from them. There's no bitterness in their eyes, no desperation in their posture. Instead of seeking validation from the avoidant, the empath has started sourcing it from within. They're out there living, laughing, growing into someone even more powerful than before. Someone who learned from the pain but didn't become it. This evolution is something the avoidant never anticipated, and it unsettles them deeply. Because now, it's not just about what the avoidant left. It's about what they can never return to. The empath has built boundaries, self-respect, and clarity. They've taken all the energy they once poured into someone who couldn't receive it, and they've redirected it into themselves. That's what healing looks like for the empath. Not pretending to be fine, but actually becoming fine, and the avoidant sees it. They recognize that the door they once kept slightly open has now been closed with intention. There's a kind of regret that surfaces when you realize someone grew in all the ways you secretly hoped they wouldn't, because it means they won't come back. That healing, that transformation, it makes the avoidant see the truth the empath didn't just survive without them. They became someone even more valuable. And that's the kind of loss that doesn't fade. It lingers, not because of what was said, but because of everything the avoidant didn't say until it was too late. When the avoidant finally reaches out again, it's usually not with grand gestures or apologies. It's subtle. A casual message, a social media-like, maybe a vague "how have you been?" They test the waters expecting the old dynamic to kick in. They remember how the super empath used to light up at even the smallest effort. They expect warmth, eagerness, a willingness to re-engage. But what they find instead is something they don't quite recognize at first. The empath is still kind, still calm, still composed. But something has changed. The emotional charge is gone. There's no anticipation, no chase, just presence. Polite but distant, it catches the avoidant off guard. They were used to being the one with the upper hand, the one who decided the pace and the depth. But now, the empath responds with emotional neutrality. They don't reach back with longing. They don't ask follow-up questions or reopen the past. They simply acknowledge the contact and then move on. The avoidant starts to realize that the person they once knew, the one who bent to meet them, who overextended just to keep the connection alive, is no longer there. What's left is someone more grounded, more self-contained, and less willing to trade their peace for possibility. This shift is powerful. It creates a tension the avoidant can't ignore. Because for the first time, they feel something they rarely felt before in this dynamic powerlessness. The emotional script has flipped. The empath is no longer emotionally available in the way they used to be. They're no longer seeking closeness. They're not trying to decode mixed signals or hold space for someone who can't reciprocate. And that change doesn't look like anger or resentment. It looks like peace, which is exactly why it's so disarming. The avoidant begins to question what they walked away from. They remember how deeply the empath loved them, how safe and seen they felt in their presence, even if they never said it aloud. And now, confronted with a version of the empath who no longer seeks their validation, they start to feel the emptiness of their own emotional habits. It's not that the empath stopped caring. It's that they've finally realized they deserve more than one-sided effort. They've reclaimed their value, and it shows in how little they now tolerate emotional breadcrumbs. That quiet confidence, that unbothered demeanor, it lingers. It unsettles the avoidant not because it's cold, but because it's clear. The empath has changed. They're no longer waiting to be chosen. They've already chosen themselves. The avoidant moves on quickly, at least on the surface. New people, new distractions, surface-level connections that don't require depth or vulnerability. For a while, it works. They're surrounded by novelty and the illusion of freedom. There's no pressure to open up, no need to explain the discomfort they feel when someone gets too close. But eventually, something catches up with them, an emptiness they can't outrun. In the quiet moments, when the excitement fades and the masks fall away, they begin to feel it. Loneliness, not just the absence of company, but the absence of being understood. And this is when they begin to remember the super empath. Because the empath wasn't just a partner. They were the one person who truly saw them, the one who noticed the sadness behind the silence, the tension behind the smile, the one who didn't just hear words but listened to what was never said. With the empath, there was a depth that felt both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because it demanded presence, comforting because it offered safety without pressure. And now, with those fleeting new connections, that depth is missing. The avoidant may not be someone who easily names emotions, but they feel the difference. The conversations are shallower. The laughs don't reach their chest. There's no emotional intimacy, just distraction. And over time, distraction starts to feel like detachment. They try to connect, but it doesn't land. No one asks them the right questions. No one pauses long enough to understand what's really going on beneath the surface. The void only grows. They start to replay memories, quiet nights with the empath, unspoken understanding in shared glances, the kind of comfort that doesn't require constant reassurance. They remember how the empath held space for their fears, even when those fears were never articulated, how they stayed gently through the walls and distance. And it hits thing no one else has done that since, because what the empath had wasn't ordinary, it was rare. This realization doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives in solitude, often when least expected. A song, a place, a random moment that reminds them of what they once had but didn't appreciate. And now, surrounded by people who don't really know them, they begin to feel more alone than ever, not because they're physically isolated, but because the one person who truly understood their inner world is gone. And in that silence, in that emotional absence, the regret starts to take root, not for the loneliness itself, but for letting go of the one person who made them feel like they weren't alone at all. The realization doesn't come in a dramatic flash. It builds slowly, often when the avoidant least expects it. Maybe it's during a quiet evening alone, maybe after a string of failed or emotionally flat interactions, or maybe while reflecting on a memory they can't seem to let go of. It begins as a subtle discomfort, then sharpens into something undeniable, the growing awareness that they never truly matched the love they were given. The super empath had shown up for them in ways that weren't flashy or loud, but deeply consistent. Their love was steady, patient, and giving. The avoidant, in contrast, had kept their distance, offered fragments, and withheld their vulnerability. For a long time, the avoidant convinced themselves that they were simply protecting their independence, preserving space. But with time and distance, they begin to see it more clearly. It wasn't independence they were protecting, it was fear of being seen, fear of losing control, fear of needing someone as deeply as the empath seemed to need them. So they pulled away, created emotional space, and told themselves the empath would always be there because they always had been. But now that unwavering presence is gone, and in its place is an echo of what used to be the warm texts that no longer come, the emotional support that's no longer freely offered, the loyalty that used to feel like a given. They begin to understand the imbalance, not just in effort, but in emotional availability. The empath gave love without keeping score, believing in the potential of what could be, trusting that one day it would be reciprocated. But that day never came. And now the regret creeps in, not because they weren't loved, don't just get a reply, but because they didn't know how to accept it when it was right in front of them. This isn't just about missing a person. It's about missing a version of themselves that only existed in the presence of that deep empathic love. The person they were with the empath, the one who was seen, supported, and safe, is no longer accessible in surface level connections. No one else mirrored their emotions with such care. No one else held space for their silence with such grace. And now, when they finally feel ready to open up, to give the love they once withheld, they find that the opportunity has passed. The empath has changed, the moment is gone, and the love they once received without asking is no longer available for the taking. That's when it hits hardest. Not just the loss of someone remarkable, but the truth that they never really gave them what they deserved in return. And so, And the story ends where it began, with presence. The kind of presence the super empath gave so freely, and the kind the avoidant never knew they would one day crave. These 5 moments aren't just about heartbreak. They're about clarity, growth, the painful kind, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers in the dark long after it's too late. Because the truth is, when you lose someone who met you with compassion, patience, and emotional depth, you don't just lose a relationship. You lose the rare chance to be truly seen. And no matter how far you run, no matter who you try to replace them with, there's no escaping the memory of a love that was real. To the super empaths listening, you were not too much. You were the lesson. And to those who only realized your value once you were gone, maybe now they finally understand the cost of pushing away someone who only ever wanted to love them deeply. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for honoring this conversation. Whether you saw yourself in the empath, the avoider in Utsamwain, remember this healing starts with truth. Growth starts with accountability, and peace starts when you stop trying to shrink yourself to be loved by those who fear depth. Until next time, be kind to yourself, honor your heart, and never apologize for loving fully. Thank you.